You said, when I was in Tokyo, I sold my Lambo for Bitcoin, when these days a lot of people are selling their Bitcoins and buying Lambos.
I think it's the same story again. We'll overestimate the amount of change in the short term, but we're going to underestimate the amount of change that we make in the long term. What do you do with your peer-to-peer electronic cash? Well, you can buy your groceries. That's great. You can do your payroll. That's great. But how about investing? Well, that's where this DeFi stuff comes into. So it allows any investor anywhere in the world to invest in any other entrepreneur or even non-human entrepreneurial type platforms, right? These various DEXs or DAOs. And nobody can stop you. No one can freeze your funds. Nobody can mess with your stuff. It doesn't matter if, Janet Yellen doesn't like what you're investing your money in. It's your money. She can't block it. This is fantastic for the entire world. If you have your Bitcoin Cash or your Ethereum or your Monero in a wallet where you have the private keys yourself, there's nobody in the entire world that can mess with your stuff. I think the answer is that the happiness is the mindset. You can be happy right now today if you want to be and if you have the right mindset. If you enjoy, having a pile of gold coins or a stack of, dollar bills or British pounds, I guess that's fine, but focus on the actual things that you actually enjoy. And I think a lot of people view money as the end goal. I think money is just the tool that you use to be able to have more time with your friends and family or be able to do the activities with your friends and family that you want to be able to do. And so you should view money as the tool rather than the goal.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Roger Ver, the American entrepreneur, crypto evangelist, investor, and business leader. You first discovered Bitcoin in 2011 when the price was still under $1, and you called it, quote, the most important invention in the history of the world since the internet. You are the founder of blockchain.com and bitcoin.com, and you became an early investor in the Bitcoin startups Ripple and Kraken. You have said that cryptocurrency is the future, stating that it will bring, quote, more economic freedom to every single human being on the planet. Roger, welcome to London Real.
Thank you for such a great intro, Brian.
Hey, it's great having you here. I've been following your stuff for probably almost 10 years. It's almost 10 years ago since I started this show, London Real. And, I started it with, having conversations with my Brazilian jiu-jitsu buddies. And I know you train, I know you're a brown belt, I'm a purple belt. And, we were just having conversations and, it changed. We started talking about mindset and nutrition and physicality. And then, Roger, back in 2013, people were talking about this thing called Bitcoin. And I didn't know who to talk to about it. I put a tweet out and everyone said, talk to Max Keiser, right, in London. And I thought, who is this crazy dude? And we were battling back and forth on Twitter. He came over to the studio. I didn't know if I'd have to choke him out or not. But he came on and for 90 minutes, he just gave this crazy rant, went off on Bernanke, but also talked about this incredible, interesting cryptocurrency. And, that was kind of the beginning, Roger, of my journey here with cryptocurrency on London Real. Now, a couple years later, I had Andreas Antonopoulos on, and he came on in 2015, 17, and 19. And Andreas, he's an amazing guy. He was visualizing the future, the internet of money. But at the time, we were still kind of playing around with Bitcoin, and I still couldn't see it happening. And so we just kept doing what we were doing. Last year, as you know, we had a head-to-head fight for freedom of speech. We did the second largest YouTube live stream in the world, and it got deleted and banned, and we went on that whole journey. And then this year, I ran for mayor of London, and we had to go head-to-head just to have free and fair elections. They tried to ban me from campaigning. The police stopped me in the streets. It was crazy. And then when we didn't win mayor, I started looking back into DeFi and crypto. And Roger, I was blown away by the amount of innovation that had happened even in the past 16 to 18 months. And, I actually traded on Wall Street in the 90s. I was involved in some really complicated fixed income derivative trades. They recruited me from MIT just to do this stuff. And I thought, I haven't seen innovation like this in 30 years. And yet it's happening from 3 dudes in Israel or 5, girls in Sweden, right? Or anonymous people out there that are setting up these DEXs. And I was just like, wow, I want to be a part of this. So we've kind of gone all in on DeFi. We created an academy. I got hundreds of students from around the world that are really embracing this idea of financial freedom. I've had some great guests on, and I couldn't be more excited. But I really wanted to have you on because you're one of the OGs in the space, stands for original gangster if people don't know. I mean, you've seen 10 years of this. So you bring opinions to this space that a lot of people don't. A lot of people are new. And I'm wondering, if you gave an honest assessment of Bitcoin since when you first saw it in 2011 till now in 2021, is it what you expected it to be? If you had to give it some maybe pros and cons or some criticism or some praise, is it what you thought it could be? Or did it surprise you in some ways and disappoint you in other ways?
So one of my favorite thinkers is a man named Ray Kurzweil, who wrote an amazing book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, and a number of other great things. And he says that humans always tend to overestimate the amount of progress we make in the short term, but we underestimate the amount of progress that we'll make in the long term. And I think the same was true of my involvement in cryptocurrency. And when I got involved in 2011, it was less than a dollar. We all felt that in just a few months, this is going to take over and be money for the world. And sure enough, it didn't happen within a few months, but here we are a decade later, and it's really made amazing, amazing, amazing progress. But back then there was only Bitcoin. Today there's Bitcoin, of course, there's Ethereum, there's Monero, there's Bitcoin Cash, there's 1,000,001 different projects out there and all these different DEXs and this and that. And it's just an amazing blossoming of innovation happening all over the world. And the part that makes the innovation so exciting is that it's permissionless. It cannot be stopped. And so to answer your question directly about Bitcoin specifically, the thing that everybody's calling Bitcoin today, to be honest and frank with you, it's an embarrassment. I'm ashamed of what Bitcoin became at this point. It was effectively censored. And someone like yourself who's dealt with censorship directly, you know what a giant problem that is. The fees intentionally were made so high on Bitcoin that everybody has to use a custodial account like a Coinbase or a PayPal or something like that. And we just saw in the news a couple of days ago, PayPal was talking about how they're going to censor everybody that doesn't hold politically correct views from being able to send payments with PayPal. Well, if your cryptocurrency is so expensive to use directly that you have to use a custodian to hold it for you, you're subject to their censorship again. And that's the entire thing we're trying to route around with all this cryptocurrency stuff, is to put people in charge of their own money so they have permissionless peer-to-peer electronic cash for the world. And yeah, a lot of people be mad that I'm calling BTC an embarrassment today, but that's because they're holding, billions of dollars worth of market cap is in Bitcoin, and those people are talking their book, so to speak. But at the end of the day, try and make a Bitcoin transaction, and then try and make a transaction with just about any other coin. Any other coin works better. And in fact, to all of our viewers here, in the next 24 hours, if you just email me, roger@rogerveer.com, I'll send you $5 in Bitcoin Cash for free, no strings attached, just mention London Real. And it's not because $5 is a lot of money. It's because $5 isn't possible to send directly from person to person on Bitcoin most of the time anymore, because it's effectively been censored. And that's why I'm going to send you Bitcoin Cash or some other currency I'd be fine with doing as well. But it's just really, really amazing how the entire world doesn't realize that Bitcoin has effectively been neutered from being peer-to-peer cash for the world. It's now just this speculative asset. And I was listening to your interview with Michael Saylor right before we jumped on here. He got involved in Bitcoin last year in 2020, and I saw him saying recently that, people tried to change Bitcoin, and that's a bad thing. Bitcoin that everyone's calling today, that is the changed version. That's the one that had its legs taken right out from under it and can't work as peer-to-peer cash anymore. And it's just this speculative asset where everyone's speculating on future speculators, whereas the real action is happening in the DeFi space, of course, and on the peer-to-peer cash space. Like we're seeing this. If you go on the darknet market, and I'm not advising you to buy anything, but go on there and poke around and take a look. Nobody's using Bitcoin. They're all using Monero on there at this point. So it's really, really a sign of the times that if something doesn't have a secondary use case, it's not going to be used as a store of value. And that's the whole narrative around Bitcoin. Everyone says, it's a store of value. Well, I have news for you. In the US, everybody uses the dollar as a store of value because they can spend it everywhere. In the UK, everyone uses the British pound as their store of value because they can spend it everywhere. whatever currency winds up being spendable everywhere on the internet is going to be the same cryptocurrency that people wind up using as their store of value. And sadly, as someone that was launching the very first businesses in the world to start accepting Bitcoin for payments, Bitcoin stopped working for payments unless you're using a custodian. And if you're using a custodian, it's not really any more exciting than PayPal at this point.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, and let's jump on this now. I was going to bring it up later, but we see this camp of Bitcoin maximalists. They call themselves that, and that really means, obviously not the Bitcoin Cash, but the Bitcoin maximalist. And we saw the conference in Miami a few months ago, right? And my buddy Max Keiser was on there, Saylor was there, and everyone there. And you see this group of people that only believe in Bitcoin, and they don't want to even talk about anything else. And it almost boggled my mind. And I mean, I'm good friends with Max. He came to my house for Thanksgiving, but it's really been hard getting him on the show because he said, look, Bitcoin won, everything else is a shit coin. I don't want anything to do with this. It's over. It's over. And I'm like, but wait a second, there's other things happening here. You have to admit the Ethereum blockchain, there's smart contracts happening. You have to admit what's happening with these DEXs. You have to admit there's innovation happening out there. You'd be a fool not to. And, Roger, even when I spoke with Michael Saylor, and we can talk more about those points as well, he even admitted, he said, look, I think he believes Bitcoin is cryptocurrency and digital property, but he said we will need a currency, and that currency will be a stable coin. And I said, okay, well, that stable coin will be based on a smart contract platform. And he said, yeah, you're probably right. Ethereum's going to be part of this ecosystem in some way. So it was nice to see a potential maximalist talking about other issues, but it also worries me that there are these really vehement camps out here that seem not to want to embrace what we all want, at least what I think we all want, Roger, which is freedom, right? Which is governments not being involved in our lives, which is a lack of censorship, which is something I think we all want. And yet, unfortunately, we're seeing camps develop, and the way you're telling it now, even the currency we think is now free is not. Is this an issue going forward, and is it going to be a problem?
It was a giant issue, and it delayed the adoption of cryptocurrency around the world by years, if not a decade there. It's really been a disaster. And I think a great analogy of these Bitcoin maximalists here that they say, oh, it's only Bitcoin and it won and the game is over. It would be like a bunch of people that owned MySpace stock. And at one point, MySpace was, it was the social network that everybody was on. But for people that were using MySpace at that time, we remember when the page load times became really, really slow, and it became really hard to use MySpace. And at that point, it was the dominant social network. But then when the user experience became, slow and unreliable on MySpace, suddenly, boom, everybody jumped over to Facebook. And I guarantee you that if Facebook's user experience became really slow and unreliable, if they start censoring so much that there's a revolt, people are going to move to the next thing. And but that's a good thing. When people move to a new and better product that's more reliable, that's fantastic. And I used to have a BlackBerry. At the time, it was a great phone. My iPhone today is much better than the BlackBerry. And I'm sure probably later this year, an even better version of my current iPhone is going to come out. That's a good thing. That's called progress. And so Bitcoin came out at one point. Well, that's great. Well, then other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum or Bitcoin Cash or Monero or take your pick came out that work even better as peer-to-peer uncensorable cash for the world. That's a good thing. And if something even better than those comes out next month, that's a great thing. That's how humankind makes progress. And to sit there in your chair and saying, oh, Bitcoin already won and everything else is pardon my French, a S-coin, that's just crazy talk, right? We want new and better technologies to come out into the world. That's how humankind makes progress. And we're seeing it happen at an amazing pace, though, in the DeFi space and the cryptocurrency space, because it's uncensorable. It can't be stopped. The only way to stop this stuff would be to turn off the entire internet in the entire world and keep it turned off. And that's not a practical thing to do at this point. So it's really exciting to see the pace of innovation happening in this space.
Well, let's talk about the censorship, because we see a lot of governments trying to censor, or at least threatening to censor. We see our centralized financial institutions also trying to restrict us. I got a text message from NatWest a few days ago saying that to protect my money, right? I never realized that they cared so much about me and my money. They're not allowing me to do credit or debit card transactions with Binance here. And people are getting these all around the world. All of my students are. And we're seeing a lot of these institutions coming in to protect us from what's happening out there. In your mind, can they be successful? Will they be successful? Do we need to watch them? Or in your mind, is this unstoppable?
I think it's unstoppable in the long run, but we want these amazing technologies as quickly as possible because they can certainly be delayed. What if they delay all this from happening for another 100 years or 1,000 years? That would be horrible, right? We want it now. We want the best things available for every human being on the planet as quickly as we possibly can have it. And to the extent that governments are delaying it with their crazy lockdowns, their crazy economic controls, or their censorship of new ideas, that's horrible for all of humankind, right? It's not good for anybody. So it's really a big important thing for us to get out there and speak out against the censorship, to speak out against the control of people's own money and what they're able to do with it. This is a life and death matter for people around the world, because more economic freedom leads to more economic growth. More economic growth leads to a higher standard of living. A higher standard of living leads to people living longer, healthier, happier lives. That's what we want for everybody. And cryptocurrencies are the best tool the world has ever had to build that world for us to all live in together.
Yeah, I think people really need to understand what's going on with their centralized financial institutions. I worked in banking for 15 years. I worked in Wall Street. I worked in Chicago. I worked here in the city of London. And I saw what happened behind the scenes. It's an oligopoly of groups that basically control every moment of your life. Almost every moment of your life is a financial transaction. And you've been educated your whole life that you're not smart enough to manage your money, right? That goes to the bankers. That goes to the fund managers. And giving you actually control, responsibility of your money, it's counterintuitive to this narrative that's one of the greatest rackets in human history. And these banks extract, I would say, between 10 and 20% of people's entire net worth per year through all of these different transactions, fees, restrictions of where they funnel that money in. And so I'm trying to really educate people and try to wreck them on both sides. First of all, the mindset. Robert Kiyosaki talks about it all the time. Poor people work for money. Rich people make money work for them. So we have that whole block. And then on top of that, we think these banks are always looking out for us. It's the only way to do it, right? The payment that takes 3 days to transfer money around the world, that's still normal for most people. And then lastly, I'll say the innovation. When I was at Bankers Trust in New York City, we were working on these incredible new technology, but it was me and maybe 20 other global banks. Now with DeFi, we've got potentially 20,000 groups of people with this innovation, and you don't have this restricted wall where we try to take all the profits. So I think it's important for people to realize that these banks, these beautiful things that with the marble, lobbies and the things we always think are these ex-institutions, I think they're holding on for dear life right now to try to get us to stop going in to these DeFi protocols. Have you seen anything that is made your alarm bells go up when it comes to statements banks have made, or even governments when it comes to, we're staying away from crypto or we're getting into crypto?
Yeah, but this has been going on for a long time. So in 2011, my company, memorydealers.com, became the first established business in the world to start accepting Bitcoin for payments. But again, this was 2011. Nobody was really using Bitcoin for payments yet, but we put out a billboard and started doing national radio ads on more than 100 radio stations across the US saying, we accept Bitcoin for payment at memorydealers.com. And what was the response? Bank of America, that I had been with for 15 years at that point, I had all my personal and business accounts with them. They closed every single one of my accounts, even though not a single customer actually had paid us in Bitcoin, simply for the fact that we were advertising that we were willing to accept payment in Bitcoin. They closed all of my accounts. And so this was in 2011. And then later in 2012, to help spread Bitcoin adoption as money for the world, I was selling physical Bitcoins. They were called Casasius physical Bitcoins. They were about the size of a quarter, and they had a hologram on them. And under the hologram was a private key. And so these coins either had 1, 10, 25, or even 100 Bitcoins on them. And I was selling these physical coins, accepting PayPal for payments. And we were shipping them via FedEx with a tracking number. And these were physical coins that had Bitcoin, private keys in them. We were sending in the mail. And then PayPal sent us an email saying, hey, we see you're selling virtual currency for PayPal. You're not allowed to do that. And I emailed them back and said, well, actually, we're selling physical coins. We're shipping in the mail with FedEx. If that's a problem, let me know and we'll talk about it. And rather than replying at all, they just closed my account and banned me from PayPal. So I got banned from Bank of America for accepting Bitcoins for payments. And then 2012, PayPal banned me for selling physical Bitcoins for PayPal. So this has been going on and on and on. And even just this very recently, another bank that thankfully they didn't close my account, so I don't want to upset them too much, so I won't name which bank, but I have some Grayscale shares traded on the public stock exchange. They're going to be unlocked here in another couple of weeks. that I want to be able to sell. And they said, oh, we're not even accepting custody of stock for cryptocurrency related stocks. It's just so crazy, the amount of pushback from the legacy financial system. But if you look at it, it's kind of like the traditional taxis in France wanting to ban Uber. Uber gives people such a better experience that everyone wants to use Uber. Why would you use a normal taxi? Yet they then lobby the politicians and lobby the political class to go and ban people from being able to use something that makes their life better. Cryptocurrency makes people's lives better, yet the traditional financial system and traditional nation states are, for the most part, hindering and blocking and delaying the adoption of this better technology. That's a shame for the entire world, and hopefully we can push through that and make it accessible to everybody all over the planet as quickly as possible. But you're not going to do that with a high-fee cryptocurrency that you can't really transact with directly yourself. So that's why I'm a fan of things other than Bitcoin. I think today people should be embarrassed to promote Bitcoin as anything along the lines of a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It just plain doesn't work. And I know as somebody who was trying to use it for payments for the last decade.
Yeah, and I want to get into that and talk about that whole ecosystem of cryptos. You know, you make a great point. Unfortunately, we're dealing with banks which have deep ties into governments traditionally, especially here in Europe. Sometimes it's really hard to tell where the bank ends and the corporation ends and the government ends. So they're going to be fighting. There's this concept of the innovator's dilemma. I'm sure you know it. But the truth is that the innovation never comes from the established business, and it's not even a conspiracy. It's just the margins are so high. They've had these businesses for sometimes centuries. They're always going to resist, and that's why you need the fight out there. And usually the product has to be, I think, 10 times better is the rule of thumb in Silicon Valley. These products clearly are, but it's still, we're in a fight right now. And it's going to be continuing to be a fight going forward. It's going to be interesting. One thing I want to ask you about before we get into a lot of the details around these various cryptos is censorship. You know, we saw yesterday BitBoy Crypto, who's been on the show a couple weeks ago, Ben, his entire channel was taken down. I think it was 24 hours ago by YouTube. I was shocked, and I shouldn't be shocked because I've gone head to head, had many strikes with YouTube. I've had multiple guests on this show that have had their entire channels deleted. And yet all of a sudden you got a guy out there who's basically promoting crypto. He's not promoting, the last time I checked, overthrow of governments, any criminal activity, anything like that. And yet the whole thing was deleted. Now he got it back, but it just makes me very concerned as to the censorship going forward. And for people that don't know, censorship is real. Last year, we had a massive fight for it. And once they burn you once, you start self-censoring. You start wondering, wait a second, can I say this one thing on this channel or not? And pretty soon, all the media you're consuming from these big tech companies that are bigger than the governments and more powerful than the governments are now censored.
And in bed with the governments, as we've seen, right? Facebook is getting direct instructions from the White House as to what sort of content to censor. So they're joined at the hip effectively at this point.
Yeah, but it's something we saw last year with pandemic. We saw it with politics, but I'd say, Roger, a lot of people don't see it as clearly with crypto. First of all, have you seen a lot of things behind the scenes? And how do we try to keep an eye on this going forward? How do we try to get real information to the people?
So the censorship in cryptocurrencies, from my own firsthand direct knowledge, started as early as 2011, right? So this is really, so in 2011 of June, for the first time in my experience with Bitcoin, there was the first big price run up. And the price over the course of a couple of weeks went from around $2 or $3 to $30 in June of 2011. And the main place where everybody was discussing Bitcoin at that time was a forum called bitcointalk.org. And on that forum, everybody kind of knew everybody. It wasn't a giant community at that point, right? The price was, single digits when this took place. And all of a sudden, what happened when the entire world and the mainstream media started reporting on Bitcoin, how it hit $30 for the first time, there was a flood of these fake accounts on the forum that were just posting nonsense fluff, buy, sell, oh no, and just made the forum completely unusable. They effectively shut down the discussion place for Bitcoin at the time when Bitcoin needed to have these discussions the most, and the most new people were coming to Bitcoin to learn about it. So as early as 2011, there was some sort of orchestrated attempt to disrupt the discussion platforms where people were discussing Bitcoin. And then much later on, I think it was 2015 or so, our Bitcoin on Reddit, and Reddit's a whole nother censorship story, but our Bitcoin was the big discussion platform where everybody was talking about Bitcoin. It had more traffic than every single other Bitcoin news website combined. And then all of a sudden overnight, All the moderators that everybody knew got kicked out of their moderatorship position. This other guy using an alias then imposed this draconian censorship policy that's been going on to this very day. And at the time it happened, everybody knew what was going on. Everybody knew the truth. Everybody knew that Bitcoin was supposed to scale on chain to be money for the entire world. You could read it right there on bitcoin.org, still to this very day, if you go on the Internet Archive Wayback Machine. But then over time, that censorship really, really became effective. And everybody that came to Bitcoin after the censorship started only got to hear one narrative, and it launched this whole new generation of Bitcoin maximalists that don't know the truth, that don't know that Bitcoin was supposed to be money for the world. And I guess that's why governments engage in censorship, is because it just plain works. And that was really surprising to me. I guess I was naive in thinking that the truth would win out in the short term. And I'm still cautiously optimistic that it'll win out in the long term, but my gosh, in the short term, what a disruptive, horrible thing it was to Bitcoin to have this censorship going on of what's supposed to be censorship money for the world. So if you're using censorship to protect your censorship money, you've missed the entire point of what's going on with Bitcoin, and that's still going on to this very day, to where you'll see people, attack me and attack Jihan Wu, the man who brought Bitcoin to all of China and translated the white paper into Chinese and spread it to the whole world. The both of us today are big, giant Bitcoin Cash fans, and you'll see these Bitcoin maximalists try and claim that we're scammers or attacking Bitcoin. No, we're the people who brought Bitcoin to the world. And then you see much more recent, newcomers to Bitcoin like Michael Saylor, who just plain don't understand because of the censorship that went on. And Michael, if you want to learn about it, more than happy to give you a one-on-one private tutoring session on everything that happened and show you why Bitcoin Cash is a better tool to bring more economic freedom to the world. And there's a fantastic website I invite people to look at. It's called whybitcoincash.com, and it explains it so incredibly clearly.
Yeah, look, censorship is real. And again, just to give people a very clear example, for 9 years, I sat in this leather chair and had long form conversations with over 1,000 people in the world. I had everybody on the show, you name it, bodybuilders, actors, politicians, activists, Edward Snowden's attorney, you name it. I had him on the show. And it wasn't until April 6th of last year where I had a 60-some-year-old man on the show. We had a calm conversation for 2.5 hours, and that episode was—
Are we even allowed to say his name?
Yeah, it's David Icke, and that was deleted and banned, and I got a real, I got a real classic case of understanding what censorship was. And so you make a great point, Roger. People think Reddit, Twitter, YouTube, even the internet to a certain extent is censorship free, when all of those things are censored. Google is an agenda engine. It is YouTube is owned by Google. All of these things have so many things in place, and whether it's a single actor or a group of people or a conspiracy or trolls, whatever it is, there are ways of shutting down narratives. And I ran for mayor last year. You wouldn't imagine some of the things that were coming out of the woodwork about me and my past and my businesses. It was incredible to see what could get manufactured, and it would change the ideas to where, as you said, anybody coming new to the game, they only know that narrative. And it's a dangerous, dangerous piece. And that's why freedom of speech is such an important piece of the equation here as humans, because if we can't talk about it, there's something wrong. And if you can't have that discussion, there's something strange. And last year we ended up creating our own separate digital freedom platform, streamed 57 interviews on there with doctors, scientists, nurses, Nobel Prize winners, 4-star generals. And the crazy thing is, Roger, is now 12 months later, most of those narratives are mainstream. And yet we couldn't talk about it at the time. So I appreciate what you're saying about this. And let's jump into these coins, because I had Michael Saylor on here a month ago or a few weeks ago. He's got $3.5 billion in Bitcoin right now. As a public company, he made a big bet. Obviously, we got the maximalists on one side. We've got people embracing Ethereum, and I know you have as well with smart contracts. You got people like Charles Hoskinson, who's going to be here in a few weeks, who's creating Cardano and some amazing systems. Tell me, what does the world need to understand about these protocols? Again, the Bitcoin Cash, and all these other potentials with Ethereum and Cardano. And also, is it a net positive that Michael Saylor is making the investments, even though you think he's maybe investing in the wrong instrument? Is it still a net positive?
Yeah, I do think it's a net positive because it's putting the spotlight on this whole ecosystem. And so everybody, for the most part, hears about Bitcoin for the first time. But then when they go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, they also discover the Ethereums or the Moneros or the Bitcoin Cash or the Cardanos. And I'm a fan of anything that works. I literally put up the seed money to start Ripple, to seed money to start Zcoin, Zcash, and a number of other ones out there. I'm a fan of anything that works. And at the end of the day, you can have the best marketing in the world, but if the product doesn't work, it's not going to take off. And so it's a fantastic thing that we have this Darwinian evolution of cryptocurrencies getting better and better generation after generation. So Ethereum is much better than Bitcoin. Maybe Cardano will wind up being even better than Ethereum, and maybe something after that will be even better than that. So this is a fantastic thing for the world. And so the fact that I think Michael Saylor is mistaken in being so excited about Bitcoin, and for the most part being a Bitcoin maximalist, that's sad for him and for his company, but it's good for cryptocurrency as a whole because people are saying, hey, a publicly traded company is putting hundreds of millions of dollars into Bitcoin. Now they have billions of dollars plus worth of Bitcoin on their book. Let me look into this. And then they'll see, oh, well, Bitcoin's horrible for payments and doesn't do much of anything other than hold it and hope other people will buy it later. But look at all the cool stuff you can do with Ethereum or smart Bitcoin Cash or Cardano or Monero or any of this stuff. And then they'll find the ones that actually work, and they'll start using the ones that work. And then before you know it, we're no longer dependent on the US dollar or the British pound or the euro or any of these other things. And people will be able to use a form of money that they actually have complete control over themselves. And they don't have to worry about being censored by their bank or PayPal or whoever else. This is a great thing for the world. So I guess thank you, Michael Saylor, for bringing so much attention to cryptocurrencies in general, even though Bitcoin doesn't do particularly much to advance more economic freedom for the world at the moment.
I appreciate their thoughts there. When it comes to the smart contract platforms, the Ethereums, obviously Cardano actually hasn't even launched, but there's a lot of hype around it and the future. And all you said, these incredible DEXs and strange things happening out there. I mean, what excites you about that space? Like, what instruments are you looking at? And how quickly do you think that's going to change the way we know finance in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's the same story again. We'll overestimate the amount of change in the short term, but we're going to underestimate the amount of change that we make in the long term. And so it's all happening, but one step at a time there. But the thing that got me the most excited from the earliest days was this idea of peer-to-peer electronic cash. Right. And so that's something like your Bitcoin Cash or a Monero or Zcash or some of these. There's a bunch of competitors in that space, and whichever one wins, that's fine as long as the world winds up with that. But then the next question is, what do you do with your peer-to-peer electronic cash? Well, you can buy your groceries. That's great. You can do your payroll. That's great. But how about investing? Well, that's where this DeFi stuff comes into. So it allows any investor anywhere in the world to invest in any other entrepreneur or even non-human entrepreneurial type platforms, right? These various DEXs or DAOs. And nobody can stop you. No one can freeze your funds. Nobody can mess with your stuff. It doesn't matter if Janet Yellen doesn't like what you're investing your money in. It's your money. She can't block it. This is fantastic for the entire world. And so what's going to be next? I think it's all the various use cases of your peer-to-peer electronic cash, which are these DeFi projects and DAOs, and who knows what things people are going to come up with next. Although one of the other things I'm very excited about are prediction markets. I don't think people appreciate how big of a deal prediction markets are, because not only are they basically like a magic time machine window into the future where you can see what's going to take place in the future, but it's also a tool for you to be able to figure out what actions you should take today to achieve your goals that you have in the future. So I think the vast majority of the world don't appreciate just what a big, giant, important deal prediction markets are. And DeFi and peer-to-peer electronic cash and cryptocurrencies enable uncensorable prediction markets for the world. And I think that's going to be a really big, powerful tool here that we're going to see rolled out in the next couple of years.
Can you go a bit deeper on that as far as explaining what a prediction market is? Is this a way of having kind of a trustless source of projecting things out in the future as opposed to other organizations that have agendas? Or maybe you could explain that.
Yeah, so it's basically a way to harness the wisdom of crowds. So like if I ask you, what do you think is the likelihood of discovering a new subatomic particle in the next 6 months? No idea, right? That's not what we're spending our day on. But let's say you're a nuclear physicist and you're busy studying that sort of thing and you think that they're close to being able to do that. Well, you have direct inside knowledge of that, right? And so all the people that have direct knowledge of that can go on a prediction market and say, okay, I'm going to bet that yes, the answer is yes. And they'll put their real money on the line because they have real knowledge about that particular subject. Whereas you and I, we don't know anything about that. We're not going to put our money on the line. So you can basically harness all the brain power of people around the world that actually have knowledge about a particular subject to the point where they're willing to put real money on the line so you can find out. And so like that's a simple thing. A slightly more complicated one would be, okay, who's going to win the next election? Well, maybe some people have some inside information about this or that, but you can harness all the different brain power of the people that actually feel that they have some real information on that. But an even more useful thing would be, okay, let's say we want to achieve, whatever goal tomorrow, scientifically, we want, to extend the human lifespan by another couple of years. Well, should the income tax rate be higher or lower? And people can bet money on that. And you can see, here's real people with real inside information that actually have knowledge in that space that are putting real money on the line. Well, they say, if taxes are lower, the average human lifespan is likely to increase in the future. That's a really, really strong indication that we should do that sort of thing. So rather than just asking one single expert, you can harness the wisdom of billions of people around the planet with that. And the problem previously was anytime any of these prediction markets started to get much traction, a lot of the things that people like to do the most is with elections. And politicians hate prediction markets with elections, and they would basically ban the prediction markets and shut them down. Well, now we have uncensorable prediction markets on the way, and it's going to be really exciting to see the various ways that they wind up being used all over the world.
I love that. Tell me, are we going to see blockchain be woven in or become part of elections, government? I know you're not a U.S. citizen anymore. We'll talk about that shortly. But like we've all watched what happened in the last U.S. elections, the controversies around the elections, the mail-in ballots, et cetera. Will this ever one day be blockchain based?
I think it's kind of already starting, but maybe from a different point of view than most people have in the world. So I look at my life and my surroundings, and I think I know how to run my life better than any politician could run my life for me. And so, for example, I went in earlier and I traded some Japanese yen for this bottle of water here, and that's because I valued the bottle of water more than the 100 yen that I paid for the bottle of water. That was a vote of my preference. I could have bought Coca-Cola, I could have bought Pepsi, I could have bought some Japanese tea, I could have bought all sorts of weird things over at the convenience store here. I chose water. Somebody else would choose tea. Somebody else would choose something else. And so people are voting with their money all the time for the various things that they want. So like I donated to your fundraising campaign previously when you were going through the censorship thing.
Awesome, thank you.
I voted with my money because I support the message of free speech and I enjoyed lots of your programs. There's lots of other YouTubers that I've donated money to because I support what they're doing. Anytime you spend money on anything, anywhere, you're voting with your money. And I think that's what's so incredibly powerful about cryptocurrencies is that suddenly now the vote with your money can't be censored. And so, for example, if people wanted to donate money to David Icke, I think probably just about every financial platform in the world has probably cut him off. Cryptocurrencies can't cut him off unless you're having to use a custodian with your Bitcoin because the fees are too high to work with it directly. But every other actual cryptocurrency, they can't cut him off. This is a really, really powerful tool. And people, I think, unless you study, economics, and there's a fantastic essay, or you can watch a YouTube video, it's called iPencil. And it's the story of a pencil. Are you familiar with the story, Brian?
Yeah, but tell it because you tell it really well and it's a fantastic story.
I'll gladly tell it. So it starts off with a claim from the point of view of a pencil. And the pencil says, there's not a single human being alive on the planet that knows how to make me. And most people stop thinking, a pencil, that's so simple. Anybody can make a pencil. What do you mean nobody knows how to make a pencil? But then he goes into the detail, right, of a pencil. There, for example, there's the yellow paint, and to make the yellow paint, they dig some dye out of the ground somewhere, and maybe mix it with something else to make the yellow paint and this and that. And then for the wood that's in the pencil, they cut down trees somewhere else, and then there's the chainsaws that are used to cut down the trees, and the chainsaws are made with iron ore that's dug out of the ground somewhere else, and they run on gasoline that comes from oil in the Middle East that's then shipped on a tanker to a refinery, and they refine it into gasoline that then winds up to the gas station that they sell it to the lumberjacks, and there's the restaurant that cooks the food for the lumberjacks that are cutting down the trees to make the wood in the pencil, and then there's the rubber tip on the end of the pencil that comes from rubber trees in Thailand and then has to get processed somewhere else. And it goes through the entire story of making a pencil, and you read the story and you realize, my God, the pencil was right. There's not a single human being alive on the entire planet that knows how to make a pencil. But the way all of these people coordinate together to come together, these people haven't met each other. There's literally millions, if not billions of people cooperating together to make this pencil that you can then buy for 25 cents. It's the money. The money transmits the information as to what to make the pencil out of. Should the pencil be made out of wood? Should it be made out of plastic? Should the rubber be from rubber trees in Thailand or somewhere else? And the money is the flow of the information for people all over the planet to be able to collaborate with each other, to be able to produce the most things for the most number of people, whether it's pencils or pens or cars or clothes or jackets or bottles of water at the convenience store. The money is what transmits the information on how to do that the most effectively in the most cost-effective, beneficial manner for the most number of people around the world. And anytime governments or corporations get in the way of that flow of the money, they're literally retarding the rate of economic progress of the entire world and lowering the standard of living of every single human being on the planet. So that's why it's so incredibly important to have this peer-to-peer electronic cash for the world that cannot be censored, so that all of us human beings on the planet can collaborate together more effectively and more efficiently to produce the things we all want, whether it's YouTube videos or bottles of water or pencils from the convenience store. It's the money that transmits that information. And so we need to get governments and corporations out of the way and out of the business of being able to censor the flow of money around the world. And that's what's had me so excited about cryptocurrencies for the last decade.
Yeah, and I love how you explain that. It's really capitalism at its finest. It's hard to believe that in the country you and I both used to live in, that they're actually debating the merits of socialism and more government control. I think it was you, Roger, that once said, quote, "Any voluntary action between anyone anywhere makes both people better off." It's a great statement. It's a simple statement. It kind of embodies the invisible hand of capitalism that, I think Adam Smith explained. And again, when the government gets involved, it's when you think they're smarter than the market to make decisions. There's been no case in history where that's ever been the case. And so we need to find ways to streamline these things. And again, this digital currency is probably one of the biggest ways where you could force multiply that. And I really love how you put that. I want to ask you a couple questions just about some other random coins. How do you feel about meme coins, Dogecoin, SHIBA, ones that, for all effective purposes, and I don't want to offend anybody out there, don't seem to have, potential, second order use cases or potential, DeFi platforms, and yet they still hold value and people amass them. Are these good for the ecosystem, bad for the ecosystem? Obviously, we see Mr. Elon Musk out there screwing around with his Twitter account. You got someone like Charles Hoskinson who really thinks it's a massive detrimental thing for the community, that it's going to bring regulation that's going to hurt all of us. How does Roger Ver feel about meme coins?
I think somewhere in between. So if you look at Dogecoin, it just plain works better for payments than Bitcoin at this point. And the inflation rate's in the same ballpark. So as a store of value, Dogecoin potentially is better than Bitcoin at this point. And that's sad for me to say, but that's the truth, right? My emotions shouldn't get in the way of the truth there. And these other ones, is it going to attract more regulatory scrutiny? Yeah, it probably will. And that's why it was so incredibly important to push out this peer-to-peer electronic cash for the entire world as quickly as we possibly could. And that's why the censorship and the delay of adoption by limiting the block size on Bitcoin was so incredibly frustrating, is because it gave the politicians and the regulators time to catch up and realize, oh, our central banks and our magic money printing machine that everybody has to use up until now, it's under threat. These cryptocurrencies, people might actually start using them. And now it's giving them time to delay and disrupt and try and regulate that sort of thing. And whereas initially my goal was to get as many people using it around the world as quickly as we possibly could. And so it would just plain become default money for the world before the regulators even knew what hit them.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.